Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into something a little different today. As we're getting closer to the holidays, I was thinking about how routines get kind of tossed out the window. And I started wondering how that affects neurodivergent folks.
It's something that doesn't always get enough attention, right?
Yeah. So I found this really insightful article, Holidays and the Disruption of Routine, by Jaime Hoerricks, PhD. And I thought, perfect timing to really dig into this topic.
It's a great article, really thought-provoking.
Okay, so first things first, right? Many people love the holidays, but there's also that stress that comes with it. But for neurodivergent individuals, it's that disruption of routine that can be a whole other level of challenging.
Definitely. It's easy to overlook how much stability and security routines provide, especially when you don't personally rely on them in the same way.
It makes you realize how much we take those routines for granted. We all have them, to some extent. But like the article points out, for neurodivergent individuals, it's not just about liking things a certain way. It's way deeper than that.
Absolutely. Routines can provide a sense of safety and predictability in a world that can feel very chaotic and unpredictable.
Which makes total sense, right? Like, if your routines are constantly disrupted, it's going to impact your overall sense of well-being.
Exactly. And Jaime Hoerricks makes this really interesting analogy to other kinds of routines we see every day. Smokers, coffee drinkers, baseball players, they all have routines. It's not about the routine itself, but what it does for that person.
Oh, that's a good point. It really puts things into perspective. So, thinking about how crucial that feeling of safety and security is, especially for neurodivergent folks, it reminds me of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That pyramid of human needs.
Yeah, definitely. The idea that we have basic needs like food and shelter, and then as we move up, it's things like security, belonging, self-actualization.
Right. So Hoerricks argues that routines actually support those foundational needs of safety and security.
Exactly. If those routines are disrupted, it shakes that foundation and makes it much harder to meet those higher level needs.
It all makes sense when you think about it like that.
The problem is, historically, the view of routines, especially for autistic individuals, has been influenced by behaviorism. This approach focuses on modifying behaviors, through rewards and punishments. And while it can be helpful in certain situations, it can also be misapplied.
Oh, I see what you mean, like trying to normalize behaviors instead of understanding and supporting the need behind them.
Right. And the article actually compares this to conversion therapy, saying both try to enforce conformity at the expense of well-being.
Wow. That's a strong comparison, but it does make you think. And it reminds me of that horrible Subway ad campaign a while back, the one that demonized autism.
That was awful. Portraying autistic individuals as a threat to society, it really shows how deeply ingrained that defective narrative is.
So damaging. So if behaviorism isn't the answer, what is? Like, how do we approach routines in a more supportive way?
Well, Hoerricks suggests something called choice theory, developed by William Glasser. It's based on the idea that all behavior is driven by internal needs: survival, belonging, power, freedom, fun. And when those needs are met in healthy ways, we thrive.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So instead of trying to change the behavior, choice theory helps us ask, what need is this routine fulfilling?
Exactly. And then how can we support that need in a respectful way?
It's about understanding the individual's internal world and working with them, not against them.
Precisely. And I think this is especially crucial during the holidays, a time when routines are more likely to be disrupted.
Yeah, for sure. Think about all the changes, family gatherings, travel, disrupted sleep schedules. All of that can throw things off balance, especially for someone who relies on routines.
And it doesn't have to be these massive upheavals either. Even seemingly small things can be major disruptions.
The article gave that example, right? The child carefully lining up their toys, and then a relative rearranges them as a joke. Heartbreaking.
Such a good illustration of how even well-intentioned actions can have unintended consequences if we're not mindful.
And speaking of things that are often misunderstood, we have to talk about meltdowns. People often mistake them for tantrums, but it's not that at all, is it?
No, not at all. Meltdowns are neurological responses to overwhelming situations. The article makes a great analogy. It's like a computer overheating because it's processing too much information.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
So it's not a deliberate act. It's the system getting overloaded and essentially shutting down.
So the key takeaway here is understanding the function of routines, respecting their importance, and creating a supportive environment.
Absolutely. Especially during the holidays when those routines are more likely to be disrupted. Routines aren't just preferences. They're fundamental to an autistic person's quality world, their vision of a good life.
I love that phrase, quality world.
Yeah.
So respecting routines means respecting that individual's way of navigating the world, right?
Exactly. It's about honoring their needs and creating a space where they can truly be themselves.
That gives us a lot to think about, especially as we head into this holiday season.
And in the second part of this article, things get really personal.
Yeah, Jaime Hoerricks starts sharing their own experiences with the holidays, especially as an autistic and trans person.
It adds a whole other dimension.
Absolutely. Like it
Yeah.
makes you think about all those pressures to conform during holiday gatherings.
Right. Especially those gender expectations.
Totally. And for someone who is both autistic and trans, those pressures can be so intense, you
Yeah.
know?
It's like they're constantly having to navigate a world that wasn't really built for them.
And that can be incredibly draining,
Absolutely. And it can even be harmful.
which is why the article talks about the power of just saying no.
Saying no to those gatherings that feel harmful or fake.
It's such an important reminder that we don't have to do things that make us feel bad, even if it's tradition.
Right. Traditions can be great, but they shouldn't come at the expense of our well-being.
And Hoerricks talks about rewriting their own holiday narrative,
Focusing on what truly matters.
like genuine connection and simple joys, instead of feeling obligated to follow all those traditions that don't bring them joy.
It's about taking back control.
Making the holidays meaningful.
But the article also goes beyond those personal experiences and starts looking at some bigger societal issues.
Oh yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
Hoerricks talks about how the holiday season is often about excessive consumerism.
It's like we're bombarded with messages to buy, buy, buy.
And it makes you wonder, how does all that pressure impact people?
Financially, emotionally.
And it also perpetuates this cycle of consumption that's not really sustainable for the planet.
That's a really good point.
It's a good reminder to be mindful of our own spending habits and to focus on what really matters during the holidays.
And then there's the critique of Thanksgiving.
The way it ignores the suffering of Indigenous peoples.
Right, and Harris talks about their family's choice to observe a day of remembrance instead of celebrating.
It's a powerful statement.
It forces us to confront that dark history.
To acknowledge those uncomfortable truths.
Absolutely.
So Hoerricks ends this section by calling for self-care and resistance.
Especially during difficult times.
It's a reminder that we have a choice in how we participate in the holiday season.
We can resist those systems that perpetuate harm.
We can create spaces that are truly inclusive.
Spaces where everyone feels safe and respected.
And there's actually an update to the article, a November 2024 update.
Oh, right. I almost forgot about that.
This update talks about the current political climate.
It really brings things into sharp focus, doesn't it?
Definitely, especially for trans individuals.
Hoerricks talks about the fear and anxiety that many trans people are feeling, given the political landscape.
It's a stark reminder that the personal is always political.
And that our individual experiences are so deeply intertwined with those larger forces at play.
Absolutely. And it makes things like safe spaces and setting boundaries even more critical.
Like opting out of those gatherings where you don't feel safe or respected.
It's about protecting yourself, your peace, your joy.
But even in the midst of all this, the update still talks about the deeper meaning of the holidays.
The importance of slowing down, finding those moments of connection, savoring those simple joys.
It's a beautiful reminder that there's still room for peace and reflection, even during such challenging times.
And Hoerricks describes their family's tradition of observing Genocide Remembrance Day.
It's such a powerful way to honor the truth.
To challenge those dominant narratives.
And ultimately to create traditions that align with our values.
The update ends on a bit of a somber note, though, acknowledging the tough reality of the political climate.
And the challenges that lie ahead, especially for marginalized communities.
Right, and Hoerricks emphasizes the importance of resilience, vigilance, and resistance.
Of speaking our truth, protecting our joy, and fighting for what we believe in.
Wow, there's so much to unpack there, I mean, when you start thinking about routines and the holidays, especially for neurodivergent folks, it really changes your whole perspective.
Definitely makes you more aware of the impact of our expectations and actions, on others. Absolutely. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways for our listeners? What do we really want them to remember?
Well, I think the biggest one is just remembering that routines aren't just like quirky little things people like. For neurodivergent individuals, they can be absolutely essential.
Right. They provide that sense of safety and control and predictability.
Exactly. And understanding that really helps us see things like meltdowns in a new light. They're not tantrums, they're a response to that overload.
That's like their system is overwhelmed and just can't handle it anymore.
Exactly. So we need to create that supportive environment, especially during the holidays, which can be, pretty hectic for anyone.
And the article also makes us think about the holidays differently in general, right? Like
Yeah.
questioning those traditions and facing those uncomfortable truths about history and consumerism.
Right. And focusing on those genuine connections, taking care of ourselves instead of just going through the motions.
It's about being mindful and really thinking about what matters. And, Jaime Hoerricks' personal experiences as an autistic and trans person, that just adds this crucial layer to the whole conversation.
It does. It reminds us that we have to consider intersectionality, like how different parts of a person's identity can lead to very unique challenges.
And how important it is to create spaces where everyone feels safe and respected and can just be themselves.
Exactly. It's about empathy, about understanding, and working towards a more inclusive world, not just during the holidays, but all the time.
So as we head into the holiday season, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners? Anything they can reflect on or maybe even act on?
That's a good question. Maybe just starting with self-reflection. Think about your own relationship with routines. How do they impact your life?
And how can we approach those holiday gatherings with more sensitivity?
Yeah.
Thinking about those who might experience things differently.
Right. Maybe this is the year to try some new traditions, to prioritize those genuine connections over obligations, to support causes you believe in.
Yeah, and maybe most importantly, to create that space where everyone feels safe and celebrated for who they truly are.
I love that. It's about recognizing that we can all make a difference, starting with our own choices.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into routines in the holidays. We wish you a peaceful, joyful, and meaningful holiday season.